Hi guys. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Doge and how Doge is upending the government here, because there's a lot of conversations about what Doge is actually doing and what Doge is not doing with that too. And so Roger's going to be talking a lot about that here today. So how you doing, Roger?
I'm doing well, Scott. How are you doing?
Doing great, man.
Good.
Just living the little dream. Sorry, I'm moving my camera. My camera just moved. So, by the way, if you guys have questions, I'm going to put this every once in a while on the screen that you can kind of see if you want to. If you need to email us and tell us a question, or if you have a question for Roger, and then he can research that and he can be back on. So you can kind of come to that one anytime you'd like to, and I'll forward that email out to him, and we'll go from there with that too. So
Sounds good.
So where would you like to go on this one here? Tell me where you're thinking.
I think one of the places I'd like to start is some basics on what's going on in the Congress right now. The funding that we currently have in place expires on March 14th. And I'm going to deal on that track just a moment. So on March 14th at midnight, there's no money left to finance the government. So the Congress is working pretty diligently, I would say, the Republicans at least, to try and come up with a continuing resolution to cover funding from that point forward through the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th of this year. Now, the interesting point about that is that in years past, continuing resolutions pretty much mirrored the earlier continuing resolution. So, for example, if they put one out for the October 1st through, say, March 14th period, then the March 15th through September 30th would mirror that, but it would be adjusted based on the number of days that are included in that continuing resolution. So they basically would be the same. And so they set up House rules that essentially said that, you can't cut budgets, you can't reduce staff, you can't do that. There are limitations on a continuing resolution. Well, what the Democrats were saying, you got to keep it the same, and the Republicans were saying, no, we're not. We're going to make certain that our continuing resolution reflects President Trump's goal of reducing the deficit. So with that, they put out a proposed continuing resolution in the House and the Senate. And then, and the reason they do one in each is they have a process called reconciliation.
Okay.
With reconciliation, all you need is a simple majority to pass your resolutions. And then they go to reconciliation, and then all the parts that are the same, then otherwise you need 60 votes in the Senate. So they're using the reconciliation process for the budget. And so when you take a look at the process with regard to how this goes, they start out by putting out in their proposal what they refer to as a floor. In other words, they're going to identify spending cuts, and they're going to say the spending cuts have to be at least this much. So, for example, they go transportation, 10 billion, HUD, 5 billion. They'll go across the board and identify what those are going to be. If there's going to be spending increases, say for defense, they might include that in there. So they say, well, we have to have at least 5 million defense increase in this budget. 5 billion defense increase. So what you do is you come up with a total amount that you want to cut the budget. And so right now the total amount is at $4.5 trillion. And that's important because when we're looking at the debt ceiling, the president wanted to raise the debt ceiling so that they could have room to maneuver through the process. So that's kind of going on in the background. That's on track.
And why did he do that? Why did he say that? Because that one bothered me too. I was like, why do you want to raise the debt ceiling?
Well, the reason you raise the debt ceiling is because the interest on the debt continues to grow.
Right.
And so far, beginning this fiscal year, we've got close to $1 trillion in expenditures already. So because Biden and his folks went to town throwing as much money out there as they could. So by raising the debt ceiling, you enable yourself the opportunity to advance your agenda items. So it's a temporary increase in the debt ceiling. That way you don't have to come back in 4 months and raise it again.
Right, but don't we want to, kill the debt in essence? I mean, why didn't he go forward? And I don't remember what it was, December, early January, when they were talking about they didn't want to raise the debt ceiling. I'm thinking, yeah, but don't you want to kill off the debt? Kill off the Fed.
Yes, you do, but it's It's one of those budgeting things they use in government. They raise the debt ceiling, number one, so they don't have to revisit it. And number two, they raise it so that in case there's changes that might cause the debt to go up, national emergency, something that we haven't planned for, like, say, for example, financial crisis that would be brought about because of armed rebellion in the streets and we need the money. So you raise that so you don't have to go back and ask for more money for these particular purposes. Hurricanes, natural disasters, fires, whatever it may be. So that gives you the cushion in there you need. And again, it's an estimate. It doesn't mean you're going to spend the full amount of the increase in the debt ceiling, but right now you can't go above that. So you have that going on in one track. On the other track, what you have is you have the Doge committee coming in, and they're going through, and we can elaborate on that a little bit with regard to the impact of that committee. And they're talking about all the different things that they are identifying, not cutting, but identifying, that demonstrate fraud, waste, and abuse. And so, for example, right now, I mean, they're close to $1 trillion in fraud, waste, and abuse.
Right.
They have demonstrated that consistently over the last number of years, going back at least 8 to 10 years, there's been $521 billion in fraud, waste, and abuse. So you have that going on. So by them diving into all the departments, they're coming up with an inventory, if you will, of where the money is being squandered and wasted. Along with that, then you have the decision being made that when you go to work in the federal government, you're a temporary employee for sometimes up to a year, maybe 18 months. And so what they're doing now is they're notifying all the different agencies, temporary employees have to go unless they serve a vital function within government. So, that becomes one of the things that they're looking at. And thanks for bringing up the chart too with Doge there. So you've got that, and then you have other executive orders that are trying to cut cost of government. So, and these are things that focus on reducing regulations, stating new priorities and principles for the department. I mean, I'll give you one example. I was looking through the transportation department, and Sean Duffy put out a new policy. And Sean Duffy, one of the elements in Sean Duffy's policy was that we will not approve any grant unless it has a positive cost benefit ratio.
That's really hard to do for them.
You have to make money. So, for example, if you lose money on your cost benefit ratio, then that grant's not going to be funded. And so if you look, for example, at what that entails within that department, I mean, that covers a lot. It can cover highway, it can cover mass transit, it can cover a lot of different areas, Amtrak, all these different categories within that department. But changing the cost benefit ratio and requiring a positive cost benefit ratio as opposed to permitting a negative one, that changes the entire direction of the department policy. You have something similar going on within HUD and some of these other agencies. So you've got those types of activities that are occurring now within the first 30 days. And then the fourth element you have is that you have individual department secretaries identifying the staff they're going to cut because they just don't need them. And so they're reducing things, they're pulling areas in, they're trying to go through and tackle this. So you've got multiple activities going on that are creating a lot of frustration and consternation for Democrats. And so that has triggered lawsuits. And the lawsuits, they're suing Trump for basically everything they can think of. But what they fail to remember is everything Trump is doing, Biden did in the last 4 years without lawsuits. So at the end of the day, the courts that are coming out upholding the Democrats' lawsuits are exposing themselves with the fraud, waste, and abuse they have and the corruption that exists. So it's sort of like a movie playing out, and you're seeing a variety of different scenes within an act that are taking place. And so that's kind of where we're at with this now. So if you want to go back to the earlier page on Doge, there's a couple of items I want to point out there. I think it's the one
on the regulation.
right there. Yes.
Yep.
So if you look at the constitutionality index here, you see in the green that those are basically the laws which the Congress has the right to do under the Constitution, and the blue is the unconstitutional or regulatory activity that's taking place within given years, including the most recent year. And so one of the elements they're doing is going through and examining all of these different regulations. And there's a few other sites out there where you can search regulations by words and by subject matter and so forth.
Which
And
is this kind of stuff here too.
yes. And so the challenge is, how do you get rid of all this? So what the departments are doing is the departments are saying, and again, this is covered under an executive order. They're saying, look, we were told we can't enforce these things. And so whether it's affirmative action, whether it's equal employment opportunity or the gender things or the diversity issues, and what you have is you have recipients of grants that are saying, no, we're going to continue to enforce them. And what they don't realize is by enforcing those, they are violating the law because it's an executive order.
Right.
And that means that there can be what's referred to as a clawback provision for the grants they received. In other words, if you haven't followed it, then we're going to pull it back in again. So a lot of organizations out there, nonprofits, some corporate entities that get grants and so forth, they're facing a real dilemma. How do they address this issue? Do they change midstream, or do they continue forward until they're told to change?
Well, I mean, I think one of those, it just occurred, I think Trump just talked about the jab, and any school who pushes the jab will lose their federal funding. And I think you do a couple things like that to the schools, or say, if you push DEI, I'm gonna cut your federal funding. What you do is, pick any university you want to do. Let's just use one of the more liberal ones, Harvard. Once Harvard says, wait, you mean I'm going to lose X number of dollars? And what will happen is they will just, they'll walk through whole departments and strip out whole majors, strip out teachers who are pushing those agenda points, and they'll police it themselves because they're going to lose the money to keep them going.
Yeah, yes, they will. And then one of the other elements of that too, as long as we're on the issue, for example, with Harvard. So if you have people who make a contribution for a specific practice or behavior or department, and that's now been outlawed, the question becomes, do they get their money back or not?
Well, it didn't.
How does the university go about doing that? Because many times they might have to pull these out of foundations. They might have to pull these out of lockdown funds. So the question becomes, if they can't do that, then they have to cut it out of their existing operational budgets, which places them even in a more difficult position.
But didn't that happen also, like with the 59 million that was in New York?
Yes.
Where they clawed back the money, and they clawed back every penny. And there was another one that was a few billion, and they clawed back that too. And I think that's what you and I were talking about with the QFS and that possibility for the Doge stuff. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes. With the QFS system, and again, I believe that the QFS has been operational for, I'm going to say, at least probably 10, 15 years. And It's been studying everything. That's my personal opinion, because they have a full map of every element of money that flows into and out of the federal government, as well as state governments and local governments. So when the members of Doge go in and they do they set their logarithms up to run through and do the mapping, they're basically confirming what they already know.
Right.
And their results are going to be compared with the QFS. And so what they're able to do is track where the money come, how it came in, how it got redispersed back out to these different accounts. So it's the proof positive, if you will, of what they need to be able to go forward and dismantle government and pull back all the dollars that have been wrongfully spent. So, for example, if you take a look at any element of government as we know it, they're able to track everything. They know where it came from, where it went, who's got it, who benefited from it. If you're laundering money, if you're moving anything through in that regard, it's there for them to see. And so the confusion that people face, they say, well, it's all these young people going in and making cuts. They're not going in and making cuts. They're validating the information that's there for people that have been installed either as senior level bureaucrats that represent President Trump, or cabinet secretaries, or agency directors to go in and make these things happen.
Well, look at this. To your point there, they actually have, if you want to join the Doge service, it's real interesting. They kind of, give you some information, bullet points, if you want to, put your resume up there. And this says, this role is in office, full-time, located in DC, U.S. citizens only. I think it's just hysterical to me.
Yes, I agree.
As well. So,
and again, looking at this, I mean, this was the left's worst nightmare. They proceeded forward all these years, moving their money around, doing everything they wanted to, without consequence. I mean, you've got Biden who sat here multiple times and said, well, we're going to discharge student loans, and nobody ever objected to it. Sure, there were some lawsuits there, but everybody said, hey, he has the authority to do that. Or he eliminated positions, or he consolidated areas, and everybody said, oh, he has the right to do that, until it's President Trump doing it. And no, he doesn't. I mean, after all, it was Joe Biden who said he was going to impound $1 billion from the Ukraine if they didn't fire the prosecutor.
And he said that
tried to do it. He got impeached.
Was it 2011 or in that range? I mean,
yes.
Okay.
I think it was 2011, 2012.
Yeah, somewhere in there. I mean, obviously, in Obama's first.
It was in his first term. Yes.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, that's amazing kind of stuff too. Well, let's. What would you think about showing that first video here that we have?
I think that would be going to pop up now.
Okay.
Love to get your reaction on just the waste that we've seen exposed. And I'm really curious, like, how did the government get away with brushing so much under the rug for so long?
Well, first of all, there's legalized corruption. You have to look at the body of law that the Congress has created over decades. That Oliver Cromwell, when he had to face the Parliament and finally decided, for reasons of absolutely unbridled corruption, the only way to save England from total destruction was to dissolve the Parliament and govern the place. I think we're
do you think that's making some? I'm going to pause here and kind of add in some things, but do you think that's something that, I mean, it is a very unique statement for him to say? What's your first response to that?
My first response is buckle up, because I think that's something we're going to see here. Because at the end of the day, we're going to reach a point where clearly supporting these things are just not sustainable anymore. As more and more people are made aware of how their tax dollars have gone. I mean, I've seen videos of people that are just absolutely freaking out because they have to work multiple jobs to finance money laundering. And they are just apologizing to the public because they made stupid decisions to vote for Democrats with this stuff going on. I saw a video yesterday where there was a woman in Michigan complaining about the fact that her monthly cash payments dropped from $4,000 a month to $88 a month because she was driving a brand new BMW 2024 and making money on TikTok. I mean, this is what makes people so angry. And it shows you it's at all levels.
Right. Basically, for me, it's I always use "sucks to be you" on that one. So
yeah,
very nearly at that point. And, that's very obvious when you look at USAID, National Endowment for Democracy. These were places where Congress could squirrel away vast sums of money that could then find their way not just to the wrong people overseas to pursue an agenda of disruption and subversion in the name of liberal democracy, obviously, but also to squirrel away money that could be delivered to their sponsors. So yes, I was. And whatever we can do to defund these things and shut them down at this stage is very, very important, because you can't fix them. This is the problem. It's not a question of, well, if we just tinker here or there, we can make modest adjustments and everything will be fine. These institutions are rotten to the core. They have to be dismantled and eliminated. And in the future, we can re-examine whether or not there is any virtue in any of it. But at this point, I would say there is none. Much more opaque, much more Byzantine, and they are going to encounter, when I say they, I'm talking about Elon Musk and whomever he's working with, going to encounter infinitely more resistance. And it will be interesting to see to what extent President Trump sticks with Elon Musk and backs him. Having said all of that, there's something else we need to understand. If you look at the structure of the banking industry and you see that we're headed into difficult territory, people will say, well, if we adjust this or that or the next thing, we can fix the banking system. Well, I think there's more to it than that. The same thing could be said for the Department of Defense. We need a radical change in national military strategy.
So, I mean, do you want to like attack that first thing with the banking kind of conversation? I mean, he was talking about how, you know, the banking structure, they go, well, we can adjust some things. And this is something I've said for a while, like we can adjust some things and make it better. And I think Doge is a portion of adjusting some things to be within budget, but it doesn't fix the background of all the the problems that you have with the debt sitting on your doorstep with that. Does that make
Yes,
sense to you?
I would agree with that, but I would go one step further and say one of the things Doge does do, though, it identifies for us all of the different regulatory structures there that have compounded and created the debt. I saw today where people are now beginning to suggest openly that they've got to nationalize the Fed. They start doing that, and they're, the audit of the IRS. I mean, you're pecking away, if you will, at all of these institutional issues that are creating the problem. And once you start to pull those apart, the banking structure is going to collapse, because there is no way that we can sustain private bankers dictating interest in our lives, what's going to happen to our money, accessibility of finances. You may have a little or a lot of money in the bank, and they're going to dictate what you can get. And they're going to tell you that if you can't get cash, then too bad, but they won't let you have it. And so that control is still there. And the way we eliminate that control is to remove the concept of banking and replace it with something different,
Right.
where everyone has control over their assets and their
And it's
liquidity.
funny because this video, and I have another video I'm going to do. No, you guys might see it next week or so. But these economists and this is a kernel are almost suggesting it. They're going, it needs more than what we think it needs, and that's kind of what Roger and I are saying here with that too. So we'll kind of move on.
And Scott, I'd just like to add one other thing here with regard to this. I think it took the break in the dam, if you will, of information for people to feel comfortable coming forward and talking about what really needs to be done. And President Trump started this on January 20th, and within 24 hours, the dam began to break. You can see cracks in it, and people are now feeling comfortable coming forward talking about this, whereas beforehand, they didn't, out of fear that they were going to be penalized, lose a job, demonetized, whatever it may be.
Right. It's pretty darn funny how it's going with that.
As well
Yes.
as in the structure of defense. That's going to go back to the economy and the financial system.
Mhm.
And I think, as I'm sure your viewers who listen to other very brilliant financial analysts, one of whom is Alistair McLeod. I don't know if you've had him on to talk to him, but his commentary over the last month or two about events in the London Metals Exchange and the gold inventories, they're priceless. You need to watch that, because what's happening in London is going to eventually happen here. London's bluff is being called. The banks there are not solvent. The gold is not on hand. What does this mean? Well, I think it means the end of the United Kingdom financially and economically very shortly. I'm surprised they're still doing anything over there.
Is that I just found that fascinating. The level of it was almost off the charts with that.
Yes, I agree with that. I think we have to realize that London continues to survive because of the United States. If we make a decision that London's going to fall, if President Trump does, it's gone. And the same is going to be true with the rest of the world economy. We basically have the keys to the kingdom, if you will. And the United States is going to make a decision, or I should say President Trump is going to make a decision, when is the right time to pull the plug, push the button, flip the EBS, whatever terminology we're going to use. But we have to get to a point of where we initiate the process to go, I believe, to the next tier.
Right. Well, would you like to do the next video, or do you have
Sure,
something
let's do
you wanna-
that.
Okay.
Kind of demanded this, they voted for it, and they're getting it.
What I find incredible is the lack of opposition in the last 2 weeks. What happened to the resistance?
I think you see, I want to make it the analogy, kind of the Tory party to the Reform Party. in the established order, they get so lazy because they control the levers of power. They control the financial community, or the financial community. So it's the financial community, the tech community, the corporatist, the universities, pop culture, high culture, media, and they get lazy. I am not shocked. I am surprised at how quickly the ideas are evaporating. What I mean by that, when you say no resistance.
Well, I want to bring this up because I have been saying this in different ways, is that these people have been winning for such a long time frame. When they stop winning, what happens is that their competitive drive, when you have to compete every day, and as a business owner, and you are in that same kind of same kind of category, as a business owner, what happens to you is you have to compete. It keeps you on your toes. But when you stop competing for whatever reason that happens, like as a business, let's say you have this, easy street contract, and there a couple of those contracts come through, and you just kind of, cruise. As soon as those contracts go away, you're scrambling, but you don't know what to do because you've built your whole business structure on the easy street stuff. And that's kind of what I've been hearing in here.
Yes, well, I would agree with that, but I would also think there's a couple of other elements here too. People got comfortable listening to other people tell them what to do in exchange for whatever support they got, whether it was camaraderie on social media, whether it was cash if you're on Medicaid, or whatever it was. And now that all those things are coming to an end, it's a dose of reality. And for a lot of them, the dose of reality means, what am I going to do? They're not willing to go out with their friends and fight for a cause anymore, because now with the new sheriff in town, that means they might go to jail and never get out. So that's an option they lose. How much money is there coming their way to be able to do these things? Well, if that money's dried up through USAID busts and people not getting it, then where do you go? So you look at, granted, the levers of power were there and they could flip them whenever they wanted to, but now they're broken. They don't work, and they don't make a connection. And so for the people that engaged in that kind of behavior, reality is set in. All of the people who did what they did through education and through social activities to comply with the DEI, for example, are coming to the realization that that doesn't exist anymore. Right. So you have all these people who lived a lie, and now they find out that the truth is hitting them right between the eyes, and they don't know what to do. And so for their own self-preservation, they're laying low. But they're also learning, and they're realizing that they really made some big mistakes. The number of videos out there floating around today of people crying and so upset because they made tremendous mistakes and they ruined their life, and they're begging for their fellow mankind, humankind, to forgive them for what they've done. It's just amazing. I mean, on the one hand, it's laughable, but on the other hand, it's really sad because you could not get to these people and get them to understand the errors of their ways. And now all of a sudden the world is different. And like I said to someone earlier, I said, okay, so you're a longtime Democrat supporter. So we eliminate the IRS, get rid of the Federal Reserve, we get rid of debt. People have money in the bank, and you're going to vote for a Democrat who wants to take away your money, who wants to put you in debt, who wants to put you back in slavery, make you work for next to nothing. Where's the sense in that? How do you judge? How do you make a proper judgment of that? What kind of thought process goes into that? And you're like,
they're just in a tilt, kind of thing. They don't know what to say to that point.
So you combine all these different things out there, and what we are really seeing is we're seeing a shift, and I think there's a natural shift that's pulling away what everybody thought was going to happen. We were told there were going to be riots in the streets and everything else was going to take place, but it didn't happen. We were told that we were going to have a stock market crash, but the market continues to go up. Do we do it now during the president's term, or do we make an adjustment in a few different ways? Do we see individual businesses self-adjust because they're losing money under the executive orders? I mean, there's a lot of different things that are going to be in a world of transition now that we can't even predict, because I do not believe that we know how every 2 steps forward is going to impact a step backwards or activities on the side.
I agree. Well, let's just listen to a little more of what Bannon talks about too.
Let's break it down in pieces. Number one, in the confirmation hearings, and we just had Tulsi and Bobby Kennedy approved, which they said was never going to happen. After we got Pete Hegseth approved, they said it was never going to happen. If you go back and your audience looks at the confirmation hearings, Marco Rubio is laying out the end of the post-war international rules-based order. Pete Hegseth is talking about a revolution in military affairs. Russ Vought and really Scott Besson are talking about a new economic model for the United States based on external revenue. Look at this thing, what we call the golden door, the golden market. Huge ideas put out on this Trump revolution, what he calls a revolution of common sense. There's no pushback. There's people going after the personal shortcomings or foibles of these individuals, but there's no pushback, virtually no pushback on the ideas, and ideas have consequences. Then if you look at the resistance in the streets, a lot of this, remember, it's how it's financed. This is why USAID is so important. So we're choking down and cutting off the oxygen because this hasn't really been financed by a lot of private groups. That money's all been slush fund through the government. So when you talk about resistance at every level, they've been shattered. They've been shattered from their financing sources. The media is kind of is just almost like a puppy now because their audience has collapsed. And one of the reasons their audience collapsed, they lied to them the entire time about how they were going to win. So at every level where there would be resistance, there's just been an absolute collapse. On top of that, the Democrats, because as I've been saying for a long time, they're ruled kind of from this octogenarian group. Those people refuse to turn over power. The committee heads, they had a protest yesterday, and the committee heads of the Democrats are all, white guys in their 70s and their 80s that don't even, can't communicate with a young audience. So no, it's been shattered. It will come back.
I mean, he believes it comes back. I believe it doesn't ever come back. No one wants to go backward in time. It's like, do you want to go back to the Ford Edsel? No, I'm not going to do that kind of thing.
Well, and see, I think it comes back differently. And the reason I say differently, this is the prime time for us to take a look at our Constitution.
Right.
What does it fund? Why don't we stick with the basis of what the Constitution funds and take a look at, okay, how much does it take to run a government that we want based on the structure of the Constitution? What do we do with everything else? We follow the Constitution and give it to the states. We make the responsibility a state responsibility. And it's interesting because if you look at this, it's almost as though our states are the democracy, our federal government is the republic. And if we follow the Constitution, and I'll explain that. So in the states, it's a democracy, you vote for whoever you need to, but a republic, or a confederacy, if you will, is a collection of states that come together and make a decision for the benefit of the collective, if you will, which is our republic. So then if we go back and we take a look at that, the founding fathers originally intended that we had three branches of government. We had the Congress, which is the purse. We had the president, which is the sword. And we had the Supreme Court, which was supposed to protect the people, to make certain that nobody had the purse and the sword and able to control the people. And what we've done is we've given the Congress the purse and the sword, and we've taken the president and given it the presidency a purse and a sword when it's a Democrat, but not when it's a Republican. And we have a Supreme Court that says, how can we be a member of the team?
Right.
And they forget about the public. So if we go back to the way that is, one of the things that has always fascinated me as an attorney, if we sit here and look at the Judiciary Act of 1789, that's when they created all these intermediary levels of courts. Well, what if we abolish that and we say we're not going to do that anymore? We have one court in here that represents the public. And if the Congress is going to pass laws and the president either signs them or vetoes them, because he's got the sword, the Congress has the purse, if we need decision-making on whether or not they're constitutional, then we truly have a Supreme Court that rules on that, rather than going through the meat grinders of the intermediary courts. And we get back to the whole element of common law, where people can truly be in a position where if there's a dispute amongst neighbors, they settle it in an equitable way.
Right.
If they have a jury, it's a jury of their peers. And I'm not talking about a farmer who has doctors and lawyers and everybody else in there. I'm talking about a farmer with farmers. I'm talking about a retailer with and so forth, because we've moved away from that and we have polluted the original intent of the founders. And so I say that my opinion is the better way to deal with this is to come back with it the right way. And then when we've identified what's necessary for our republic government, and we've said we're going to limit it to these 6 or 7 things, everything else goes to the states. The states have the flexibility to do what they want to based upon how their population decides. And then we still have those elements in there where the states are supposed to cooperate with each other. I think we find ourselves in a much better position financially as well, because we're not paying taxes to support all these crazy ideas and give people jobs who hold down a chair so it doesn't float away.
Yeah, but still, I would say, my slight pushback in some of the things you were talking there is that let's, give an example. IRS potentially brings in 4.7 trillion. The budget is set at 6.7, 6.8 trillion kind of thing. Even if you drop the budget down to make up a number, 2.7 trillion. Let's say it goes 2 trillion underneath what the IRS would do, which means you wipe out the IRS and you say, well, we're going to get that 2 trillion by a few other small ways. Some of them by a sales tax that are very minor when you realize it, and really made for people who are buying new things in essence, and they have the money to do that. And then secondly might be, the tariff kind of thing. But when you do that, you go, great, we fixed the government and we fixed some of the laws that the Doge stuff does. You still have to break the process all the way down to the core because of 2 things. And I'll let you kind of talk a little bit about those 2 things. But the 2 things are, number one, we still have crazy Nancy, Mitch, McConnell, and all these other idiots who are criminals running around in the government who are always going to hold you back, and including, media and all this other stuff. And secondly, though, is you still have a debt. And it's not just the federal debt, it's all the debts that are on the people and on the businesses right now that are choking it. And you have to have a break point too. Yes,
I agree with that. So there's multiple levels there. I'll hopefully try and cover all of them. So when I talk about breaking this down to the basics and starting over again, okay, I'm making reference also to the fact that if we look at our legislative process at the federal level, I'm talking about taking this back to the basics of where we go back to the original intent of the founding fathers, where the House of Representatives were representative of the public. The goal was to go there for a term or 2 and then go back to doing your job. And so everybody that's in there, we put term limits in place. Everybody that's in there, 2 terms in the House or 3 terms in the House. We go back to the idea of the Senate. The Senate is appointed by the state legislatures who make the decision. I mean, the public elects their state legislatures. So the senators represent the state legislature, not wealthy interests. So you got to clean that up. So there's that going on with the legislative branch. We also take a look at, if we eliminate that Judiciary Act of 1789 or put something different in its place, we change the process whereby disputes and criminal matters and cases move all the way up to the Supreme Court by getting rid of all the stuff that goes on in between them. Again, that's a process that takes place. That's simultaneously with the concept of re-educating lawyers and judges. Right. We also have that track there where we talk about the debt. So if you have a debt jubilee, which would be consistent with biblical teachings, with the Sarah, with everything else, and you sit here and you have a one-time forgiveness of debt, then the debt that's owed to banks, lenders, corporations, things like that get wiped out. Now, the question becomes, how do we pay for this? Well, we have a lot of corporations out there who have made trillions of dollars off of human slavery. And by human slavery, I'm talking about the sex trafficking of children and adults. I'm talking about forced labor with people. I'm talking about the fact that you work for jobs and businesses and they depress your income because the way the business gets structured, it's more important to provide income to the shareholders than it is to the employees. And if you take a look at how that's impacted, it's across all industries. And then the other element that's there, if these agencies were engaging in any kind of corruption, graft, or anything else like that, then there has to be a way of pulling back the proceeds, ill-gotten gains from that. All the people like the Nancy Pelosi's and Mitch McConnell's that engaged in graft, corruption, personal enrichment as members of the Congress, that money gets pulled back. Now, when that money gets pulled back, that money goes into something that's controlled by, say, something like a sovereign wealth fund or some mechanism there to help finance, to rebalance, if you will, the wealth of the public.
Right.
And, you can you can put in there basically any source of funding you would like. You can include Bitcoin in there. You can include other types of investments, a revitalized stock market. There's a way to financially work through the process, I believe. Then the other element you have is that the people who have engaged in being perpetual government officials, whether they be elected or appointed or bureaucrats or what have you, there's going to have to be a shakeout of those because some of those were just innocent people trying to get a job and earn a living. Others have benefited from corruption and graft and kickbacks and moving back and forth and engaging in activities that most of the public finds unconscionable. And so those individuals then are going to have to deal with a loss of their wealth and a loss of the benefits they've had. And so we're going to have to figure out some way, how do we address what those people have done? Is it worthy of being in prison or is it more of wealth limitation for their family?
Right.
So there's a lot of different aspects I think we have to go through. I'm not suggesting that these happen years apart. A lot of them I think should be planned out and occur within a short period of time.
Yeah. I mean, and that's something that I think a lot of people struggle with when Roger brings that stuff up. But what he's really talking about are some of the legal processes, some of the stripping away of the systems so that you get to the core principles of how to do this down the road. And you're fixing the roads in essence, the physical roads and the metaphorical roads. Those are the things that's going to take time to do.
Yes, and then also when we take a look at how do we address the issues, the disparities between states and so forth. So, for example, I'll look at the Northeast corridor. One of the questions that was asked of Sean Duffy when he took over as Secretary of Transportation was whether or not he was going to continue to deal with funding of mass transit concerns, in particular in New York. And his response was, I hope a lot of people get married and have a lot of kids because they're going to need it. And he was suggesting that if you want this to happen, you have to start being responsible for your own. And so, for example, states that are within a region in the country could come together and form a compact. That's permitted under the Constitution. And you form that compact and you raise money locally to pay for, say, mass transportation as an example, or for hydroelectric dams, or for certain other types of elements that's controlled by the community. Why should farmers in Wyoming pay for a high-speed rail in California or mass transit in New York? That makes no sense. And so what you do is you return not only the control back to the people, but you make your financing more responsive to the people that are going to benefit from those financial activities. Same thing is true with business. If a business decides to locate in New York because, say, the stock market's there or there's some other activity going there, then you would expect that business to be in a position to contribute.
Right.
And so there are ways that we can reset or readjust how our government functions and how it's paid for. The concept of tariffs, I think, is an important role to play for the government, and they can sort of spread those out for things like defense, the ports, protection, things like that you would ordinarily expect the government to be involved in. But also, we have people that continue to work and save their money for Social Security, retirement accounts, things of that nature. So we need to have a mechanism whereby they can continue to see growth in their investments. They can continue to see opportunity with the resources that they have. And so the idea, for example, of a sovereign wealth fund or some other funds like that that can provide growth opportunities for them is really important, rather than having them take their hard-earned resources and pay an IRS who's going to divert it someplace else that has no benefit to them.
Well, and I think that's a really powerful point. I mean, I'll give you an example of what Roger's kind of saying. You know, one of the things that happens in every city that has like an NFL stadium or a NBA, hockey, stadium, is that they require the city to, the owners will say, we're going to fund in some of this, but we want the city to pay for, a $2.5 billion stadium, or we're going to move. And so they hold them hostage, and you got, people who love the team, but now the city is having to come up with more money, and the city doesn't pay for it itself. They just leverage it against the people. And so there's just more and more drain. And the response should be, hey, you want a new stadium, and yes, the stadium does benefit the people and benefit the area, but the person that wants the stadium so that, can benefit most should be forking over the most amount of that.
Or as an alternative, maybe you should sell shares in the team,
Right.
and then get people that own shares in the team to help build the organization. And that way, that's a new way of generating wealth and investment for people.
And I think a lot of this stuff, it can be solved by very simple kind of ideas. But what Roger's also saying here too, sorry, what Roger's talking about as well is that there are ways of taking it from, and most people don't realize, Nancy Pelosi is a trillionaire. And so there's a way of saying, we're going to take all those funds because you have been, a really sick criminal, and you are actually going to be paying for a huge amount of the stuff, all the money that she collected, and a whole bunch of these people collected off the backs of the people, are going to be right down the corridor to pay for the things for the farmers or for the whatevers to make a difference.
Yes, and again, the other part of that is if you look at any individual, organization, business, collection of individuals, interest groups, whatever you may have, anyone who participated in the process to do the transfer of wealth from the average American citizen to a limited group of elitists who were able to enrich their own wealth, all of that has to be pulled back, because it's considered ill-gotten gain. And if you truly look at trying to balance our system out, that is the only way we get there. Socialism will say, we're going to come in and force it, and we're going to take it away from everybody and decide the winners and the losers. But in our country, we have a republic, and so there are ways that we can do things, I believe, in a legal and in a humane way to make this work. In addition to that, we have all the wealth over the generations that has been stolen from this country, that is in the form of gold and resources and wealth located elsewhere. And so we need to pull that back to this country and make certain that other countries have theirs back, so that they can do the same thing we want to do. Because I believe we have a better, more appropriate and humane planet if we do that. We don't have people trying to run into one country over another because they have wealth at home. Right. They have a lifestyle at home that they enjoy. So there's no need to run away and work someplace else and send your money back. The other part of that is that if we change the structure around so that people don't have to be indebted to slavery in their jobs, people start doing different things. They start looking for ways of being self-sufficient or helping others or creating a process whereby they can truly make a difference in what's occurring. But we have to get out from under that umbrella of the government control and the dictatorship, if you will, of the debt. Because the debt controls us, and once we get free of that and figure out a way that how we can change our lives around that, that makes all the difference in the world. And even though the umbrella of debt is controlling us, there's another umbrella on top of it, which is the IRS and the federal government. And then on top of that, we have all the elected officials in Washington, the swamp, if you will, that are holding the purse and the sword and forcing all of us into activities that we would prefer not to deal with. And then, of course, we have their overlords, whomever they may be, and they have to be taken out as well.
Right. And I think the process, what Roger's kind of telling about, it's again, some of the process is going to happen quicker. Some of the process is going to take a little more time, because we'll have to have some people in there working through the process. But if you notice how fast the Doge is happening, it's going so quickly. I mean, USAID was open one day, and 2 or 3 days later, they're chipping the sign off the wall, the outside wall. I mean, you're going, you don't chip the sign off until you've like deleted the whole department. I mean, I wish we had seen the people walking out with boxes, but the reality is there weren't probably people walking out with boxes, because 4% of these idiots are even at the job. So it's a lot simpler to do in that way.
Well, and I think one of the other things, if we go back and listen to President Trump, there were a couple of times where he made reference to the fact that, yes, I'll be a dictator on the first day. After that, things are going to be fine. Well, what people don't realize is that as dictator, he came in and, as soon as he was sworn in, he snapped his fingers, or, somebody else did. And they said, okay, we're locking down computers. We're going to lock the doors. We're going to make sure nobody else gets in, because that was a federal holiday. So the first day back was the day after the inauguration. So they had everything locked down. If people worked remotely from home with their computers, they were not able to log in. All these different things took place. This was a plan in the making, and it had to happen fast. And what I believe the real beauty of Doge is that they are showing people in real time what was going on, how their money was being used, who was benefiting from it, and all the other different activities that were taking place that most Americans were totally opposed to. And you take
99% of Americans.
They are. I mean, that was a setup.
Well, 99% of Americans are real Americans, other than the freaks. Maybe I know the 17th letter talks about the 4 to 6%ers, which I think are still out there, and that's probably the loudmouths that you're seeing. But the reality is, no one with a brain wants to see our money going to weird tranny responses or condoms here and there, and you're going, come on, give me a break.
Yes.
Let's take care of the people in North Carolina or in Hawaii or in Florida or in pick the area that we're talking about, and in every single area, and say, let's let them take care of the roads. Let's let them take care of the building. Because they're going to do a better job of it. They're going to do it in quicker time frame with it too.
Yes, they will. And I believe the other part of this too, as we go through the process, it's about education. When people become knowledgeable about what government should be compared to what it has been, that's going to inspire, I believe, a lot of people to want to get involved and say, you know what, I could do a better job than those people were doing. It's going to inspire people to come and have a conversation, which is really nice. It's going to inspire people to say, look, I believe there's a better way to do this, and I've got a skill set that I can bring forward to help make this happen. No one wants to see a repeat of what's already there. And so if we start doing that and inspiring the people to get involved, and then we include with that, debt jubilee, give people an opportunity to have a gold-backed security. We start and gold-backed security, and they have resources, they have money in the bank. They know that they're going to have enough money to survive. I mean, it just causes people to want to do something better. It gives them a reason to get up every day and go do something that's positive and that makes a big difference. So many people, I believe, over the last number of years have just been lulled into this complacency where they can't respond because they know every time they take a step forward, they get pushed back too.
Right.
And so the beauty of Doge is it said, wait a minute, folks, there's a reason for you not feeling well. And it's right here, right before your eyes. Nobody knew it, but guess what? We're exposing it.
Correct. That's correct with that too. So,
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Roger. I really appreciate
you're
everything
welcome.
that you're talking about. Guys, I think what's going to happen is, we're what, February 14th. February 14th. And the reality is, guys, just be calm. Everyone asks when. Listen, no one knows the when, but when the when hits, it's going to be pretty severe. And so everything's going to be okay with that too. So thanks so much. I really appreciate your time too.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
All right. We'll see ya.